Let's take a dip into the world of dip pens. Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. It's Nico from Yoseka here today, and we're going to be talking all about Kakimori dip pens today. Today, the nibs that they have available are glass, copper, brass, stainless steel, and then they have a regular pen nib that's shaped more similarly to a fountain pen nib. If you haven't heard of Kakimori before, they're a Japanese stationery and lifestyle brand that actually started back in 1961, so quite a while ago. And they started out as a commercial office supplies company, so they were making just traditional office supplies, selling it to offices and things like that, until 2010 when they opened their storefront in Kuramae, Tokyo. 3 years after opening their storefront, they stopped making commercial office goods and fully shifted to the Kakimori we love and know now. A lot of their core beliefs revolve around themes of intentionality, usefulness, sort of like more minimalist, handcrafted artisan items, I suppose. So if you actually visit their store in Tokyo, they offer some really cool customization services like ink customization, where you can bring them a color and they'll try to replicate it, swatch it, and make sure that it's just right so it's an ink you'll want to use. In this vein, they also have a custom notebook station where you can pick the cover, the fillings, and then get it bound by them. And this is just another way that they're making supplies that are very intentional, thoughtful, geared towards people's very specific lifestyles or wants, and really aligned with something that people will actually be using in their daily lives. Other products include pen holders, they make fountain pens, ballpoint rollerball pens, they've also got a bunch of notebooks, pigment inks, they make a bunch of stuff. But ever since the release of their dip pen collection in 2021, that has really become one of their staple products. Every handle and nib is really thoughtfully ideated, crafted. They work with a lot of local artisans to create these, and the materials are also very local to Japan. So this is just a very thoughtful, beautiful line. So let's take a look at it. Before we dive into that, if you were curious as to what dip pens actually are, I'll quickly go over that. So dip pens consist of two parts. First off, there is the nib holder. So this is the part that you're actually holding with your hand, and it often features an area up here where you will insert the actual nib itself. So then, of course, the second piece is the nib. These can look a lot of ways. This is kind of a more interesting, like bullet-sized one, as compared to nibs that look like this, a little bit more similar to what your fountain pen nib might look like. It's different from a fountain pen or a pen because this one doesn't have an ink reservoir. So as you're writing, you'll have to dip it into the ink consistently, and all the ink that is held by this is whatever clings to the nib. So that's why we see some different variations of nibs. This one has like some more ridges where you can see there's areas for the ink to seep into for a longer writing time. Whereas ones like this, it can really depend on what ink you're using, how much will cling to this. So once again, this is the nib holder, and Kakimori makes these in a bunch of different woods and materials. For example, this one is aluminum. Nib holders that they produce after 2025 also have a new connection point up here that will fit both small and international standard size nibs. So this is really nice because it opens up the opportunity for you to use nibs from other companies. To go over the nibs that we're actually going to be testing out today, for the bullet-shaped ones, we've got the copper nib, the brass nib, the stainless steel nib. Next up, we've got the glass nib. This is a very sought-after release. It's pretty hard to get, and I think right now one of the only places you can get it is actually in store at the Kakimori store in Japan. This was a very limited batch because they worked with local artisans to create these one-of-a-kind blown glass nibs. So these kind of make it able for you to use your nib holder as sort of a glass pen too, so it kind of expands the idea of like what sorts of nibs you're able to use. And then finally, we've got the pen nib. So we're going to test these out by doing sort of a bit of like a nib log, but it's going to be a little bit different, a little bit shorter, and a little bit more suited towards things that you're using dip pens for. So we're going to test things like line variation, ink retention, and then we'll also know any other things like interesting sounds, qualities that each of the nibs may have. All right, let's get into it. For this Kakimori nib test, we're going to use their pigment ink Mukuri, which is actually sort of like a dark brown pigment ink. So I've got the nib holder in the color White Sakura, which is like cherry blossom tree wood. And we're going to start off with the copper nib. And as you can see, it really just slides on in there, just like that. So first up, we're going to be testing line variation. So I'm going to write with the pen upright, then at around 45 degrees, and then I'll write with my normal sideways motion. All right, we've got some ink on there. So upright, it doesn't work that well, but as we angle it to 45 degrees, you can see it distributes the ink really beautifully. And then a little bit more angled, I don't know, maybe like 15, 20 degrees, you can see that it can do some pretty thick lines there. Next, we're going to give it a dip, and we're going to test the ink retention of this. It has a very smooth, like soothing metallic noise as you're writing with it. And you can see that the ink is starting to run out a bit as it's getting a little bit juicy and flowy here, but it's writing for quite a while. Something really cool about this copper nib as well is that because it's a copper metal, it will actually patina and change over time, which can kind of switch the writing qualities of it. Kakimori has more of an in-depth look at this on their website, but that is just something to note, that a lot of these metal ones will sort of change over time as you're using them. So that is our copper line here. I would say that for line variation, it's pretty good. It seems that you can get a fair range of sizes out of it by angling the pen differently. The more you have it angled, the more ink it's outputting, which is a really beautiful way to display if you have like a dual shading ink or a shading ink. I feel like that would display beautifully with this copper nib. And it has a pretty large ink retention. So I know a lot of people have this idea that dip pens are sort of for calligraphy or things like that, but I think it's a great way to test out inks for a shorter period of time. So for this one, I feel like you could do a journal entry. You would just have to dip it a couple of times or sort of do a page spread. But yeah, I'm really impressed with how long it held onto that ink. I think it's the ridges they put in it that really suck up that ink. All right, so on to the next, we're going to do brass. Straight out of the box, it's really beautiful, golden colored. Gonna put it onto our nib holder here. Gorgeous. And again, brass is one of the metals that does patina. So we actually have one of these over at the store that we've been using for like 4 or 5 years, and the color has really deepened and darkened. So first up, we're going to do the line variation again. Straight up and down, of course, not too great, but actually a little bit more than the copper. And then if we angle it a little to the side, gonna try to do some different degrees. Whoa. See how thick we can get it. And we'll do the ink retention test. Interesting. It's pretty much around the same as the copper one. This one had more of a sound to it. It had more of like a feedback adjacent noise as you're writing, but it's definitely very soft and enjoyable. And then up next, we've got steel here. Doing the line variation. This one actually writes pretty well, straight up and down, and then you can still get that large range of lines from this one too. I think that's to be expected of all of these because they are all carved into the same size. I would say that this one feels a bit harder than the copper and brass. I think that the brass felt the softest to write with. Is just like, I don't want to say flexible because obviously it's not like a flat nib where you can kind of press it and get that flexibility out of it, but this one has more of a not scratchy, but a stronger feedback feeling than the other two did. But it does seem to have a longer ink retention than those. All right, so here's the 3 bullet-shaped nibs tested out. They all have pretty similar line variation and ink retention, with the stainless steel having a bit of a longer ink retention than the copper and brass. But I think that these all write pretty similarly in terms of looks, but as you're writing, there is definitely a felt difference between the 3, with the brass being the softest, and then I think copper and stainless steel being the hardest. I wouldn't exactly describe it as scratchy, but I would say there's a significant amount of feedback and it doesn't feel as buttery or smooth as that brass one felt. All right, on to the next, we're going to do the glass nib. So there that is. Wow, that one really, so much ink clung onto there. So this one is able to write at the sort of 90 degree angle there. And it does get a bit scratchier as you angle it downwards, but I would say it's pretty pleasant. It kind of feels like writing with a fountain pen, which I think is kind of unusual. I think personally, I've struggled with gloss pens in the past where I think they're just really scratchy, but this one feels super nice. It also has a really nice subtle feedback. As it's running out of ink, it is starting to feel a little bit scratchier, but I don't think that it's necessarily unpleasant. Okay, I think this one is winning the ink retention competition, as I've done 3 lines, and as you can see, there is still quite a bit of ink left on there, so I'm impressed. And then last but not least, we've got the pen nib. For this one, I'm not expecting much line variation just because it's shaped like a normal nib, so we'll still do it. Yeah, like I expected, there's not a ton of line variation. The nib has a little bit of flex to it, I think just because of its size, but it is a stainless steel, so it's not gonna be as soft as maybe a gold nib would be. And it's holding a lot more ink, I think, compared to some other nibs that I've used as dip pens before. This one's holding quite a bit of ink on there. I do wonder if it's different because this is pigment ink. It might have a different sort of, I don't know what the word is, torque? Okay, that was not as impressive as I thought it would be. So the pen nib ran out of ink pretty quickly, but it did keep a pretty consistent line across here. So I think depending on what type of writing or calligraphy you might do, that would be really helpful. I know that this is really nice for things like ink samples maybe as well, if you're trying to just get a consistent look at how it would look coming out of a fountain pen or something like that. But yeah, here's a look at all of these. I would say that the bullet-shaped nibs all performed similarly as I talked about earlier, just a difference in softness. The glass nib was very enjoyable to write with. It had light feedback and it was not very scratchy, and I think that you were able to get some amount of line variation out of it with, of course, that really large ink retention. And then the pen nib was nice to write with. It was smooth, it had some feedback to it, it had a consistent line width here, and it did have a little bit of flexibility, so you could use it for things like calligraphy, but I definitely would not expect maybe as dramatic of a calligraphy look as you might get out of a stub nib or one of these bullet-shaped nibs. So yeah, that rounds up our test of every Kakimori Dip Pen Nib. These are all of the ones that they have out right now. Again, the glass one is a little bit hard to get your hands on, but you can find it in person at the Kakimori store in Japan. These are all really fun to play with, and I think that Kakimori is just a really beautiful brand. They're very thoughtful and curated with their products, so it was really fun to take a look at this selection. Thanks for watching. We hope this was helpful for you guys. If you're someone who uses dip pens, we'd love to hear what your preferred nib is and why. And maybe if you have any thoughts on how they perform between pigment inks or fountain pen inks, that's something I'm a little curious about now after testing with this pigment ink. So yeah, thanks so much for watching. We'll see you in the next video. Bye.